I never thought my life would be defined by a strip of sand and a dirt road. But when Patricia Montgomery of the Seaview Estates Homeowners Association decided to wage war against my property rights, everything changed. My name is Dominic Iverson, and for the past 15 years, I've owned a modest beachfront cottage on the coast of North Carolina, about 20 minutes south of Wilmington. It's nothing fancy, a weathered blue two-bedroom with a deck that faces the Atlantic and enough charm to make it my sanctuary from the chaos of my life as a commercial airline pilot. I bought the place back in 2010, a foreclosure that needed work but came with two incredible assets: private beach access and 5 acres of land that stretched from the coastal road to the shoreline. The previous owner had been some sort of eccentric local businessman who'd purchased a strange patchwork of properties decades ago. When I signed the papers, the real estate agent mentioned something about an easement and a service road, but honestly, I was too distracted by the view to pay much attention. That would come back to bite me later. For years, life was simple. I'd fly routes for 3 weeks, then retreat to my coastal haven for a week of solitude. I kept to myself, maintained my property, and enjoyed what felt like my own private slice of the Atlantic. The neighboring development, Seaview Estates, had always been there, a collection of pastel-colored luxury homes occupied by retirees and vacation renters, but we coexisted peacefully. Their residents would occasionally walk past my property on the beach, and I never minded. The ocean belongs to everyone, after all. Then everything changed when I accepted a temporary international assignment, a 6-month contract flying routes in Asia. The pay was exceptional, and I couldn't pass it up. Before leaving in January, I arranged for a local property management company to check on my place monthly, mow the lawn, and handle any issues. I'd done similar arrangements before for shorter trips, and it had always worked fine. When I returned in early July, bronzed from layovers in Thailand and exhausted from the 16-hour flight back to the States, all I wanted was to hear the ocean from my deck and sleep in my own bed. Instead, I pulled into my driveway to find something that stopped me cold: a 6-foot chain-link fence cutting directly across my property, completely blocking my path to the beach. A large sign hung from the center of the fence: "Private property, Seaview Estates residents only, trespassers will be prosecuted." I sat in my truck, engine still running, trying to process what I was seeing. The fence cut a straight line across what had always been my land, about 50 yards from the dune line. My immediate reaction was to assume there had been some catastrophic misunderstanding, maybe a surveyor's error, or a mix-up with property lines. As I approached the fence, still dragging my suitcase from the airport, I noticed a woman in white capri pants and a pastel blue polo shirt marching toward me from the Seaview Estates side. She looked to be in her mid-50s, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair cut in that distinctive "can I speak to your manager" style that immediately put me on edge. "Excuse me." "You can't be here," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that people who love enforcing rules seem to cultivate. "This is private property now." "I'm Dominic Iverson," I said, dropping my suitcase. "This is my property. I've been away for 6 months, and I'd like to know why there's a fence cutting across my land." Her smile was practiced and completely devoid of warmth. "Oh, Mr. Iverson, I'm Patricia Montgomery, president of the Seaview Estates Homeowners Association. We've been trying to contact you." "About what, exactly?" "The beach access easement," she said, gesturing to the fence. "The HOA board voted unanimously to terminate unauthorized access through our community beach. We've consolidated the beachfront for the exclusive use of our residents and their guests." I felt my blood pressure rising. "This isn't your community beach. This is my property. I have the deed right inside my house." Patricia's smile didn't falter. "Perhaps you misunderstand property law, Mr. Iverson. The HOA has legal authority to manage common areas and access points. Your deed may grant you ownership of the land, but the beach access easement has been revoked." "You can't revoke what you don't control," I argued. "I never signed anything giving your HOA authority over my property." She pulled a folder from under her arm and handed me a stack of papers. "Actually, when the previous owner sold to you, there were certain covenants that transferred. Page 4 explains the provisional beach access arrangement." I flipped through the papers, the legalese swimming before my jet-lagged eyes. "I need to talk to my lawyer before I discuss this further. In the meantime, I expect this fence removed from my property within 24 hours. Patricia actually laughed at me. "That won't be happening, Mr. Iverson. The fence stays. If you have concerns, you're welcome to bring them up at the next HOA meeting on Thursday evening." As she walked away, she called back over her shoulder, "Oh, and just so you're aware, tampering with the fence would constitute vandalism. We have security cameras installed." I stood there, exhausted and confused, staring at the papers in my hand. Through the fence, I could see children playing on what had always been my beach access. Elderly couples strolled along the sand. A family was having a cookout near the water's edge, all on what I believed was my property. Too tired to think clearly, I dragged my suitcase inside, showered off the airplane grime, and collapsed into bed. Tomorrow, I'd sort this out. Tomorrow, I'd figure out how an HOA I didn't even belong to had somehow seized part of my land while I was halfway around the world. I woke up the next morning to the sound of laughter outside my window. Rolling out of bed, I peered through the blinds to see a group of people in swimsuits walking along what should have been my private path to the beach. They passed right by my bedroom window, chatting loudly as if they owned the place. After a strong cup of coffee, I decided my first move should be a conversation with the property management company I'd hired. I called their office and asked to speak to Mark, my regular contact. "Dominic." "You're back," Mark sounded relieved. "I've been trying to reach you for months." "I was in Asia," I reminded him. "Limited connectivity. What's going on with this fence on my property?" Mark sighed. "It started about 3 months ago. The Seaview Estates, HOA, sent formal notices claiming they were reclaiming beach access rights based on some old agreement. I forwarded everything to the email address you gave me and tried calling your international number. I checked my phone. There were indeed several missed calls from Mark and a folder of emails I hadn't seen, buried under airline notifications and junk mail. The downside of international work, sometimes communications slip through the cracks. "Why didn't you stop them from building on my property?" I asked. "I tried, Dominic. I really did. They showed up with permits from the county and a legal letter saying they had the right. When I questioned it, they threatened to sue the management company. I'm not a lawyer, I maintain properties. I documented everything and kept trying to reach you." I thanked Mark for the information and hung up. Next, I called my lawyer, Franklin Wilson, who had handled the closing when I bought the property. He agreed to see me immediately. An hour later, I sat in Franklin's office in downtown Wilmington, watching him review the documents Patricia had given me. "This is concerning," Franklin said, adjusting his glasses. "There does appear to be language here about a provisional beach access agreement, but it's tied to a reciprocal easement arrangement." "What does that mean in English?" I asked. Franklin leaned back in his chair. "From what I can tell, The previous owner granted Seaview Estates residents the right to access the beach through a designated path on your property. In exchange, he received an easement across their property for some other purpose. I've never used any easement on their property, I said. That's the thing, Franklin replied, tapping the document. According to this, there's a service road that runs through your property that Seaview Estates has been using for maintenance access to their clubhouse and pool area. It's a mutual arrangement. They get beach access, you get. Well, the previous owner got road access. My mind raced back to the property survey I'd barely glanced at 15 years ago. There had been a dirt road cutting across one corner of my land that I rarely used, leading toward the Seaview Estates development. Are you saying they can't actually block my beach access? I asked. Franklin shrugged. This is complicated. Technically, if they're terminating one easement, the reciprocal easement would also terminate. They can't have it both ways. He looked up at me. Do they still use this road? I think so. There's a maintenance road that their landscapers and service vehicles used to reach their clubhouse from the back. It cuts across the northwest corner of my property. A slow smile spread across Franklin's face. Then we have leverage. They can't legally block your beach access while continuing to use your property for their road. It's a reciprocal agreement. So what do? I asked. First, we send a formal legal letter demanding they remove the fence and restore your beach access. If they refuse, we file for an emergency injunction. And he paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. Actually, there might be a faster way to make your point. I'm listening. If this road truly is on your property, and if they've terminated the easement agreement by blocking your beach access, then technically, they no longer have legal right to use your land for their road. I caught his meaning immediately. So I could block the road. Franklin nodded but held up a cautionary finger. Legally, yes, but proceed carefully. Document everything. Take photos of the fence they built. Survey the property line to confirm the road's location. And when you do block access, make sure you post proper notices citing the terminated reciprocal easement. I left Franklin's office with a plan forming in my mind. First, I'd give Patricia Montgomery and her HOA a chance to do the right thing. Then, if they refused, I'd show them exactly what happens when you mess with a pilot who knows how to navigate turbulence. The next morning, I drove to the Seaview Estates Clubhouse, a sprawling Mediterranean-style building with manicured gardens and a massive pool. The parking lot was half full with luxury cars bearing local plates and a few out-of-state vehicles belonging to vacationers. Inside, the air conditioning was cranked to frigid levels. A young woman at the reception desk smiled at me. "Good morning, sir. Are you checking in for a rental?" "No," I replied. "I need to speak with Patricia Montgomery." Her smile flickered. "Do you have an appointment? Tell her Dominic Iverson is here regarding the beach access fence." The receptionist made a quick call, speaking in hushed tones. A moment later, Patricia emerged from an office down the hall, looking immaculate in a pink linen dress and pearls. Her smile was just as insincere as it had been yesterday. "Mr. Iverson, I didn't expect to see you until Thursday's meeting." "I'd rather resolve this privately," I said. "I've reviewed the documents with my attorney. The fence needs to come down immediately." Patricia gestured toward a small conference room off the lobby. Once inside, she closed the door and her friendly facade disappeared. "Mr. Iverson, the board has spent considerable resources securing our beachfront. The fence isn't coming down." I placed my hands on the table between us. "The documents you provided reference a reciprocal easement agreement. If you're terminating beach access across my property, then you're also terminating your right to use the service road that crosses my land to reach your clubhouse." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Patricia's face. That's a maintenance access road. It's been in use for decades. On my property, I clarified. The same property you've decided to fence off. You can't have it both ways, Patricia. She recovered quickly, her expression hardening. Our legal counsel has thoroughly reviewed the situation. That service road is covered under a separate utility easement. I hadn't expected that argument. I'd like to see documentation of that easement. I'll have our attorney provide it at Thursday's meeting, she said dismissively. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a water aerobics class to oversee. As she stood to leave, I remained seated. One more thing. Who authorized construction on my property while I was gone? The county issued permits based on our easement rights, she said. Everything was done legally. We'll see about that, I replied. I expect to see documentation of this supposed separate utility easement on Thursday. If it doesn't exist, that fence comes down, or your maintenance vehicles find a new route to your clubhouse. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Mr. Iverson. You're one person against an association of 87 homeowners. We have resources you can't imagine. And I have property rights you can't override, I countered. See you Thursday. Walking back to my truck, I was furious but also increasingly suspicious. If there truly was a separate utility easement for the road, why hadn't Franklin mentioned it? And why would Patricia only produce it at the meeting rather than showing me immediately? I spent the rest of the day driving to the county records office, where I requested copies of all easements, surveys, and permits related to both my property and Seaview Estates. The clerk, an elderly man named Harold who looked like he'd been working there since the building was constructed, told me it would take several hours to compile everything. There's a coffee shop across the street, he suggested. I'll call you when it's ready. While waiting, I called Franklin and updated him on Patricia's claim about a separate utility easement. That's news to me, he said. When we handled your closing, the title search only showed the reciprocal easement agreement. If there's a utility easement, it should have been disclosed. Could they have created one recently? I asked. Not without your signature as the property owner, Franklin assured me. Keep me posted on what you find at the records office. 3 hours and too many coffees later, Harold called me back to the records office. He had a stack of documents nearly 6 inches thick. Found some interesting things, he said, his eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. This property of yours has quite a history. I spent the next 2 hours at a table in the records office, poring over surveys, deeds, and easement agreements. What I found confirmed my suspicions. There was no separate utility easement for the maintenance road. The only document referencing that road was the reciprocal easement agreement, the same one that granted beach access across my property to Seaview Estates residents. Even more interesting was a survey from 1978 showing that the road in question cut across nearly 200 feet of my property before reaching the clubhouse area. There was absolutely no way for service vehicles to reach the back of the clubhouse without crossing my land. Most damning of all, I found the permit application for the fence. Patricia had signed an affidavit stating that the fence was being constructed entirely on Seaview Estates property, a blatant lie, given that it cut directly across my land. I had Harold make copies of everything relevant and thanked him for his help. As I was leaving, he called after me. One more thing, he said, handing me a yellowed document. Found this filed separately. Might be useful. It was a water access covenant from 1965, predating both my ownership and the establishment of Seaview Estates. It stipulated that all properties along that stretch of coastline were guaranteed beach access in perpetuity, regardless of future development. This is gold, I said, grinning at Harold. He winked. Been working here 42 years. Seen plenty of HOAs try to pull fast ones. Good luck, son. Armed with this new information, I drove straight to the county permitting office before they closed. The clerk at the counter looked exhausted as I explained the situation. "So you're saying they obtained a permit to build on your property without your consent?" she asked, typing something into her computer. "Exactly. They claimed it was their property, but the survey clearly shows it's mine." She frowned at her screen. "I see the permit application. It was approved based on a property boundary attestation signed by the HOA president." She looked up at me. "If what you're saying is true, that's permit fraud. Can you revoke the permit?" She shook her head. "Not without an investigation. But I can flag it as disputed, which would prevent them from obtaining any additional permits until this is resolved." It wasn't the immediate solution I wanted, but it was something. I thanked her and headed home, my mind racing with possibilities. That evening, I walked my property line, taking photos of the fence and documenting exactly where it crossed my land. I also photographed the service road, noting several fresh tire tracks from what appeared to be a large maintenance truck. The next morning, I visited a local hardware store and purchased several no trespassing signs, heavy chains, and padlocks. I wasn't going to block the road immediately. I'd give Patricia one more chance at Thursday's meeting, but I wanted to be prepared. I also called a local surveyor, who agreed to come out that afternoon to officially mark my property boundaries. It cost me $800 for the rush job, but I needed official confirmation before making my next move. The surveyor, a taciturn man named Jim, spent 3 hours measuring and placing small flags along my property line. When he finished, my suspicions were confirmed. The fence cut across approximately 80 feet of my land, and the service road traversed nearly 200 feet of my property at its widest point. "They definitely built on your land," Jim confirmed, handing me a preliminary survey report. "The official documentation will be ready in a few days, but this should help in the meantime." That night, I could barely sleep, thinking about the confrontation to come. Part of me wanted to chain off the road immediately, but the rational part knew it was better to have one more conversation, to give them a chance to do the right thing. Besides, I wanted to see Patricia's face when I revealed what I knew. Thursday evening arrived, and I dressed in my pilot's uniform not because I had a flight, but because I knew it would give me an air of authority. Petty, perhaps. Effective, absolutely. The HOA meeting was held in the Seaview Estates Clubhouse at 7:00 p.m. When I arrived, the room was already crowded with residents. A long table at the front held Patricia and 6 other board members, all watching me with varying degrees of hostility as I entered. I took a seat in the back row, nodding politely to the elderly couple who shifted to make room for me. The woman smiled sympathetically. "You must be the pilot with the blue cottage," she whispered. "I'm Elaine. My husband and I voted against the fence for what it's worth. Nasty business." Before I could respond, Patricia called the meeting to order. She ran through standard HOA matters, complaints about unapproved mailboxes, a discussion about pool hours, and an update on landscaping contracts. Finally, nearly an hour into the meeting, she addressed the beach access improvement project. "As you all know, we've successfully secured our private beach access by installing appropriate fencing and signage," Patricia announced proudly. "This has already resulted in a 50% reduction in unauthorized beach use, which many of you have noted has made your beach experience more pleasant." Several residents nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. "We do have one item of business related to this project," Patricia continued, her eyes finding me in the back row. Mr. Dominic Iverson has raised concerns about the fence location. Mr. Iverson, would you like to address the board? I stood and walked to the front of the room, turning to face both the board and the residents. Thank you. For those who don't know me, I own the blue cottage south of your development. For 15 years, I've been a good neighbor. I've never complained about Seaview residents walking across my beach frontage or about your maintenance vehicles using the road that cuts across my property to reach your clubhouse. I paused, looking directly at Patricia. While I was overseas for work, this HOA illegally constructed a fence across my property, blocking my access to the beach. When confronted, your president claimed there was a separate utility easement for the maintenance road. That was a lie. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed red. I've spent the past 2 days researching county records, I continued. There is no separate utility easement. The only agreement is the reciprocal easement that grants your residents beach access across my property in exchange for allowing the service road to cross my land. I held up copies of the documents I'd gathered. Furthermore, I discovered that Mrs. Montgomery committed permit fraud by claiming the fence was being built entirely on Seaview Estates property. The survey I had done yesterday confirms that the fence crosses 80 feet of my land. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. We have documentation. No, you don't, I interrupted. And I've already filed a complaint with the county permitting office about the fraudulent application. But here's what's going to happen. You have until noon tomorrow to remove the fence from my property and restore my beach access. If you refuse, I will chain off the service road and your maintenance vehicles will no longer have access to your clubhouse. The room erupted in confused conversation. One of the board members, a balding man in his 60s, leaned over to whisper urgently to Patricia. She waved him off. Mr. Iverson, Patricia said loudly, regaining control of the room. You can't block the maintenance road. Our landscapers and pool service require that access. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. By terminating my beach access, you've also terminated your right to use my property for your road. That's how reciprocal easements work. Ask your attorney. I gestured to a thin man in an expensive suit who was sitting at the end of the board table. He looked distinctly uncomfortable. Additionally, I continued, I found this water access covenant from 1965 that guarantees beach access to all property owners in perpetuity. I held up the yellowed document Harold had given me. So not only did you illegally build on my property, but you also violated a binding covenant that predates your HOA's existence. The attorney asked for a brief recess, which Patricia reluctantly granted. The board members huddled with him in a corner while residents buzzed with conversation. The elderly woman who had spoken to me earlier gave me a thumbs up from her seat. After 10 minutes, the board returned to their table. The attorney whispered something to Patricia, who looked furious. Finally, she tapped the microphone. After consultation with legal counsel, the board proposes the following resolution. We will remove the portion of the fence that may encroach on Mr. Iverson's property, pending a new survey commissioned by the HOA. Not good enough, I replied immediately. The entire fence comes down, my beach access is fully restored, and you issue a written apology for building on my property without permission. Patricia's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. That's completely unreasonable, is it? I addressed the room at large. How many of you need the clubhouse for events? How many have children who use the pool? Because starting tomorrow, if that fence remains, there will be no way for service vehicles to reach those facilities. No pool maintenance, no deliveries for events, no landscaping. The residents began to stir uncomfortably. A woman near the front raised her hand. "I have my daughter's wedding reception scheduled in the clubhouse next weekend," she said, glaring at Patricia. "Are you telling me that might not happen because of this dispute?" Before Patricia could answer, a man stood up. "My family uses the pool every day. My kids have swimming lessons on Monday. Why are we just hearing about this road issue now?" The meeting quickly spiraled out of Patricia's control as more residents voiced their concerns. The board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, the attorney stood and addressed the room. "As legal counsel for the HOA, I recommend the board accept Mr. Iverson's terms to avoid potential liability and service disruptions." Patricia looked like she might explode. "We will need to discuss this in executive session." "No," interrupted a board member, the balding man who had whispered to Patricia earlier. "I move that we vote now to remove the fence, restore Mr. Iverson's beach access, and issue a formal apology." "I second," said another board member quickly. Patricia had no choice but to call the vote. It passed 6-1 with only Patricia opposing. "The fence will be removed tomorrow morning," the balding board member announced, taking control from Patricia. "Mr. Iverson, on behalf of the board, I apologize for this unfortunate situation." I nodded my thanks. "I appreciate that. Once the fence is removed, the reciprocal easement will remain in effect. Your residents can continue to use the designated beach access path across my property, and your maintenance vehicles can continue to use the service road." As the meeting adjourned, several residents approached me to apologize and introduce themselves. Many claimed they hadn't known the fence had been built on my property or about the potential consequences for the service road. Patricia stormed out without speaking to anyone. The attorney caught my eye and gave me a small nod of professional respect before following her. The next morning, I sat on my deck with a cup of coffee, watching as a crew dismantled the fence. By noon, it was gone, and my view of the beach was restored. The work crew foreman handed me a formal letter of apology from the Seaview Estates HOA, signed by all board members except Patricia. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I returned from a grocery run to find Patricia in my driveway standing next to a police officer. My heart sank. "What now, Mr. Iverson?" the officer said as I approached. "Mrs. Montgomery here has filed a complaint alleging you've been harassing her." I looked at Patricia in disbelief. "That's completely false." Patricia's eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect hair disheveled. "He threatened our entire community. He tried to hold our clubhouse hostage." The officer, whose nameplate read Reynolds, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, can you explain your side?" I briefly recounted the fence situation, the reciprocal easement, and the HOA meeting resolution. Officer Reynolds listened attentively. "You have documentation of this easement?" he asked. "In the house," I replied, "along with the HOA's letter of apology acknowledging they built on my property without permission." Patricia's face contorted. "That letter was coerced. He blackmailed the board." Officer Reynolds held up a hand. "Madam, please let me handle this." He turned to me. "Would you mind showing me that documentation?" I invited him inside, leaving Patricia fuming in the driveway. After reviewing the documents, Officer Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Property disputes aren't a police matter unless there's a breach of peace," he explained. "But I don't see any evidence of harassment here. It appears there was a legitimate property dispute that was resolved through proper channels." When we returned outside, Patricia was pacing beside her car. Officer Reynolds approached her. "Mrs. Montgomery, based on the documentation I've seen, this appears to be a civil matter that's already been resolved by your HOA board. There's no basis for a harassment charge." "But he—" "Madam," Officer Reynolds interrupted firmly. "Filing false police reports is a serious offense. I'm not going to take any action today, but I strongly advise you to let this matter rest." Patricia glared at both of us before storming to her car and speeding away. Officer Reynolds sighed. "Sorry about that, sir. We get a lot of HOA-related calls." "I appreciate your professionalism," I told him. He nodded. "Word of advice: install security cameras. People like that don't always give up easily." I took his advice, installing cameras covering my property the very next day. It proved to be a wise precaution. A week later, I was awakened at 2:00 a.m. by an alert on my phone. The security camera had detected movement near the service road. Groggy but concerned, I checked the footage and was shocked to see Patricia Montgomery and two men attempting to install posts for another fence, this time across the service road where it entered my property. I threw on clothes and grabbed a flashlight. By the time I reached the road, they had already placed 3 posts in the ground and were preparing a section of fencing. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, shining my light directly at them. Patricia squinted against the brightness. "This is Seaview property. We're securing our perimeter." "This is my property," I corrected her, pointing to the surveyor's markers that were clearly visible. "And you're trespassing." One of the men looked uncertainly at Patricia. "You said you had permission." "I don't need permission," she snapped. "This road has been part of Seaview Estates for decades." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police, and this time you're going to be charged with trespassing and attempted vandalism." The two men immediately backed away. "We're not getting involved in this," one of them said, dropping his tools. "You told us this was authorized work on HOA property." Patricia was left standing alone as the men retreated to their truck. Her face, illuminated by my flashlight, showed a combination of fury and desperation. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "You know how much property values have increased since we restricted beach access. The exclusivity was going to let us raise HOA fees, and there it was, the real motivation behind the fence. It had never been about privacy or reducing beach crowding. It was about money. Leave now," I said firmly, "or explain your midnight construction project to the police." Patricia hesitated, then stormed back to her luxury SUV and sped away, tires spitting gravel. The next day, I forwarded the security footage to the HOA board members along with a formal complaint about Patricia's behavior. I also filed a police report. Though I didn't press charges, the footage was evidence enough if I needed it later. 2 days later, I received a call from the Balding board member, who introduced himself as Richard Davis, the newly appointed interim president of the Seaview Estates HOA. "Mr. Iverson, I wanted to personally inform you that Patricia Montgomery has been removed from the board and from her position as president, effective immediately." "I appreciate the call," I replied. "May I ask what happened?" Richard sighed heavily. "After reviewing your footage and conducting an emergency board meeting, we discovered several concerning irregularities in HOA finances under Patricia's leadership. The fence project was never fully approved by the board. She presented it as a simple repair rather than a new construction. Furthermore, she appears to have been planning to sell exclusive beach access passes to non-residents, which would have violated our bylaws and possibly state law." He paused before continuing. "We've also learned that Patricia has been trying to purchase your property through a shell company. She's apparently been obsessed with consolidating control of the beachfront for years. That explained her vendetta against me. My property was the missing piece in her plan to monetize beach access." "What happens now?" I asked. "The board would like to meet with you to formalize a new, clearer easement agreement," Richard suggested. We want to ensure both your beach access and our use of the service road are properly documented and protected going forward. No more misunderstandings. I agreed to the meeting, which proved remarkably cordial. The new board was apologetic and practical, focused on restoring good relations rather than continuing Patricia's power play. We signed a new, detailed easement agreement that explicitly protected both my beach access and their use of the service road. As summer turned to fall, life returned to normal. Seaview residents would wave as they passed on their way to the beach, and I'd nod back, our silent acknowledgement of the peace we'd established. The maintenance trucks continued to use the service road without incident, and I enjoyed unobstructed access to my beloved shoreline. Patricia Montgomery put her Seaview Estates home up for sale and moved to Florida, according to the local gossip. I can't say I was sorry to see her go. One evening in late September, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset, Elaine and her husband Harold, the sympathetic couple from the HOA meeting, stopped by on their beach walk. "Beautiful evening," Elaine commented, leaning against my deck railing. "Care to join me for a drink?" I offered. "I've got cold beer in the fridge." They accepted, and soon we were chatting like old friends, watching the waves roll in as the sky turned from orange to purple. "You know," Harold said, sipping his beer, "in 30 years of living here, we've seen a dozen HOA presidents come and go." Patricia was the worst by far, Elaine nodded. She forgot the most important rule of community living. "What's that?" I asked. "Good fences don't actually make good neighbors," Elaine replied with a smile. "Good neighbors do." I raised my beer in agreement. "To good neighbors, then." As we clinked bottles, I realized something important. The value of my little blue cottage had never really been about the property lines or legal easements or even the beach access. It was about having a place where I belonged, a community of reasonable people who respected each other's rights and spaces. Patricia had tried to draw lines in the sand, both literally and figuratively. But like all lines in the sand, they were destined to be washed away by the tide of common sense and basic decency. The road to my beach access remains clear now, as does the service road cutting across my property. Two pathways serving as a constant reminder that sometimes the best way forward is to recognize that we're all just trying to find our way home.